I'm very glad to have you all here for this last session of the day. It's a roundtable about data at the forefront, shaping national and international policies for the European education area through evidence-informed practice. The idea of this roundtable is a bit to pick up on some of the themes that have already been discussed during the day, starting from Stefan Hermans this morning, and see how different countries work in terms of using data in order to inform policies. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers with us today. Well, to start with Roberto, who doesn't need any introduction. We continue with Carmen Tovar Sanchez, who is actually the counterpart of Roberto in Spain, as she is the director of the National Institute for Educational Evaluation in Spain, then Andrea Santelli, former European Commission and now academic counselor at the University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, Ali Denisi, who's Director General at the unit of, that basically deals with the evaluation of the Recovery Resilience Fund in Italy, with special focus on education. And then last but not least, Andrea Netten, who is actually the director of IA in the Netherlands, especially dealing with, if I'm not mistaken, PEARLS and SECS. Is that correct? The idea here is to have a few questions for our speakers, and then, of course, to leave space also for you to interact with them. But I will initially kick off with the first question, to which I would ask each of you to provide your answer in 4 to 5 minutes each maximum, and I will try to be strict with the timing so that we're sure that we finish by 6:10. So the question to begin with is the following. How can data collection at national and international levels be improved to address gaps and better inform policy decisions for the European education areas? And can you share some illustrative examples? I guess we can start from Andrea at the end.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm quite honored to be here. So as Daniela said already, I am from IA. So most of my answers will be also somewhat IA related, but I try to be a bit broader than that. So I think everybody knows at this conference already that IA conducts international large-scale assessments such as PEARLS, STIMS, ICCS and ICILS. And I think, so this is quite an important question, but it's also a very difficult question to answer. So I'm going to highlight 3 key areas in this that I think are important. So first of all, harmonization. So this is one of the most significant challenges we actually face, I see, in the European education area. It's that the variation in how data is collected across countries is different. So they have different methodologies, reporting standards, and educational structures that can make it difficult to actually compare data between nations. And this is also why IA has been leading the charge for decades through large-scale assessments like TIMSS and PEARLS, where we actually established already highly standardized methods for collecting and analyzing the data, and I think most of you are aware of that also. So by promoting these harmonized approaches and ensuring that they are adopted more widely, we can significantly reduce the discrepancies and make cross-national comparisons more meaningful. But having such a large mechanism behind the standardized testing, we also run into an issue, and that's timeliness, and that's my 3rd key area that I want to talk about. Because having something like PEARLS and TIMSS also means that it takes a long time to actually report the data that you get. So for instance, we are getting ready to release the data from TIMSS 2023. So the main testing actually occurred in March 2023, and we only report on it this coming December, which is December 2024. So that means that a lot of policymakers have to wait, and you saw also during Corona times that there was need of quick data, of what's actually going on, what's going on a year after Corona, what's going on. Organizations like IA can't really make that time that we need for these international assessments much smaller. So this was something that came across the General Assembly also 2 weeks ago. So we have a General Assembly meeting every year. And then our members can say what they actually expect from IEA. And one of the things was, can you reduce the time between actual measurement and reporting? That's something that's really difficult in standardized large-scale assessment like this. And the third one, and then I quit, because I don't know if Daniela's already looking at me for time. Yeah, exactly. And the third one is actually inclusivity, and that's really difficult also. So we have to make sure that we don't only measure the larger groups, but that everybody gets involved in it, and also that we measure different languages, that we measure students with disabilities, and also that's really important to do, but it's also quite difficult in large scale assessments. I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation to participate to this very distinguished panel. And I think this is going to be a very successful 3 days, given the quantity of participation that I've seen from different parts of the educational system. So INVALSI, I think, has finally, this is different from other years. This has been my impression, although I've been here only for a few hours this afternoon. Coming to the question, what can be improved? So I'm counting on my 5 minutes, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. To say something about this. So I, maybe from a different point of view, to enrich also the discussion, I see things a little bit differently, in the sense that I do think that international efforts in harmonization, comparability of data, and the availability of large-scale surveys is quite fit for our environment, especially for the European environment, or the rich club country environment, I would say. So OECD, let's say, environment. I think that what we really need to sort of reflect on is that we have a huge quantity of data. This has not necessarily improved educational outcomes, and it's been now several decades that we have improved the availability of this data. So I think that we need to try to understand better how to make this abundance of data useful for the purposes of improving educational outcomes, equity, and a number of other, let's say, objectives in the educational system. And to do this, more than exploring many other data, let's say, domains, there are two big questions, issues that we need to learn to manage, which is managing and making individual data usable and accessible. And the other one is, so one is usable and the other is useful. We need to make individual data level usable, accessible, this means, and the other issue is to make it useful. Today, policymakers have an abundance of data, of aggregate statistics for comparability reasons on the inputs of educational systems, on the diversity of educational systems, on the outputs, and on some of the outcomes of this system. If there is an area, or maybe 2 or 3 areas, which I think are underrepresented, here it is early age education, on which there is not the same abundance of data, crosswise and in single countries. Data that looks at not so much the typical competences that we have now, we are used to looking at, so those typical capabilities, but other types of capabilities which have to do with, for example, interaction capabilities, socialization capabilities in the educational system, citizenship capabilities, which I don't think are very widespread in our availability of data to understand some mechanisms of the educational system. And then what I find a little bit interesting in all these years that we have been focusing a lot of educational data is that one of the main inputs of the educational system we know too little about. This is the teachers. Although there are outstanding efforts, for example, TALIS, there are different kinds of efforts in trying to capture the functioning of, let's say, teachers. I think that this is an area where we could be collecting and harmonizing, understanding, trying to find interpretational schemes to be able to collect more useful data. When we come to usability of individual data and usefulness of individual data, we're talking about very different things. The usability has to do a lot about, again, accessibility, privacy problems. We'll get to that, let's say, later on. Data that at the individual level has to be protected, but at the same time has to be accessible not only to researchers, but again, to teachers. We need to focus on how to get this data that is explored mostly at an academic level to an exploration that is useful to the main key of the education system, which are the teachers. And although there are lots of experiments, lots of efforts, different types of ways in which, especially at the national level, there are initiatives to try to do this, I think this is an area where we lack an interpretational background, and we lack also of individual data to help. And this is a very difficult problem. It is difficult because it has even more resistance than measuring outcomes on students for many reasons. We're talking about a very important part of the labor force in all of our countries, mostly publicly financed in Europe, not only. So it is obviously a very difficult topic, but I think that this will be the topic of the future unless we renounce, and I don't think this is possible because I don't believe it, in the idea that the teachers are the main tool to improve the educational system, apart from obviously in changing the possibilities that the context, a very difficult context obviously, gives in the schools. So I would say focus on individual data and maybe in the future try to focus more on teachers.
Okay, so I'm going to use another focus as well, coming from a different country, from Spain. As we move closer to the European Education 2025 goals, having efficient data is really very, very important, but there are many challenges. So how can we improve this data that we have? Well, I have thought of a few points that I don't know if I'm going to have time for all of them, but at least I'm going to mention them. One of them is sharing national methodologies for data collection, because it's true that most countries have their own data collection systems, but we are not considering what other countries are doing. I think it's very important to share this knowledge that we have, because we then can avoid redundancies and fill in the gaps that we have, and then countries can adapt and adopt solutions that already exist, and we don't have to be inventing the wheel every time we need to do something. So this collective sharing is very important for me. Also, another important aspect I think we need to focus is to identify new areas in which data is needed and updating the methodologies, because many of the data collection systems that we're using now are based on very old frameworks that were designed years ago when the educational era was different. So things have changed, education has changed, and so has the data that we need to collect. For example, there are topics now such as equity, inclusion, well-being that are at the center of many of our policy discussions. But however, traditional data many times lack this, we can't get this information. We don't get this nuanced dimension with traditional data. So it's very important that we focus on this, that we identify gaps, and that we try to get data that reflect the evolving priorities of the European education area. So this is a key factor for me. Also, something very important is aligning the national data with the European objectives, because it's true that we all have our own nuances, our own priorities, context, but we also share some common objectives within the European education area. So we have to track progress, collective progress towards these objectives. So it's important that we align our national data collection with this wide European indicators, because otherwise what we're going to have is incoherent, fragmented data, and it's not going to be useful, and it's going to undermine the policy interventions at the European level, which is something essential as well. And something very obvious, but that sometimes we forget, is investing in resources for data collection. Because effective data collection implies investment in resources, both human and material. So if we lack these resources, what we risk is having a lot of under-analyzed data that may misguide decisions from politicians, and that's very dangerous. So we really need to invest in resources. Also, we need to harmonize data standards, as Andrea has mentioned. We need common definitions on key indicators. We all talk about equity, we all talk about well-being, but do we mean the same? Is equity measured the same in one country or the next? So that's very important to have common definitions. We have to leverage technology and innovation, because we need to use these new tools that we have at our disposal. AI, machine learning, because it really can enhance data collection. And coming from the public administration, because I work at the ministry, many times we forget that it's essential to have partnerships with the private sector, because this private sector can bring technological expertise and also provide some solutions which are very important to improve the quality of data. So we don't have just to look at ourselves, but look in the private sector as well. And last but not least, I think we need to involve every stakeholder in data collection. We don't just have to involve politicians, not just educators, but we have to involve students, parents, families, everybody, because then we'll have data that reflect realities and not the realities that we think from a ministry that there are. So these stakeholders, the students, can provide a context for the data. So really, to improve data is not just about having more data, because as Aline has mentioned, we already have a ton of data. It's a question of collaborating, of using technology, of using resources, and all that can lead us to have better policy and to help us meet the goals from the European education area.
Thank you. And I, of course, would like to support everything my distinguished colleague already said. I would like to add 2 points on this topic. The first one is I think we should use the data that we already have in order to have the courage and to add new perspective in our researches. What I have in mind, I think at the moment we are very good. We are able to explain very well, or to explain at least some reasons why we are observing, we are seeing some differences. But we should have also to take another perspective. It means if we are able to explain by using our data, I don't know, 40–50% of the variability, we should also take the courage to look into the other part of the variability. It means how our teachers are efficient and able to face the challenges that we have now to face. I know that it's a very dangerous field, as Aline said, but we should do that. For instance, in Italy, in our country, we know very well that we have big differences among regions, and we are able to explain part of these differences because the background, the social background, economical background of these regions is extremely different, but these differences are able to explain only 40, 45, 50% of the variability, and the rest we should also use the data in order to try to explain that. And the second aspect, we are, if I could remember the question, we are taking the perspective what we can do for the policy, but I think we should also take the perspective in another way around. We should also learn from the policy. I mean, we have to use our data in order to try to answer explicitly to questions posed by the policymakers. If we use the data only for research purposes, I think we miss a point. I mean, sometimes policymakers are not so familiar with the data, or not, how can I say, available to use data in order to take decision. I'm trying to say politely what we all have in mind. But on the other way around, I think we should also take their perspective in our attitude by using the data. We should have the courage to use the data in order with, of course, clarification and caveats, but we should also use the data and harmonize the data in order to do comparisons among countries. There is a project, a European project that we are part of that is trying to harmonize this data, but again, I think data could be very important in order to try to give at least examples how to manage, how to try to solve the problems that we see, and not only to describe the problems. And last point, I think we should also take the perspective of the use of data in order to see the problem in advance, not only to describe problems. Nowadays, we are able to use the data to see now what is very likely will happen in 10 years, in 5 years to our students. There is a lot of risks, I understand the point, but we should also use the data in this perspective. We did a very, very small research and activity by using our data, and 85% of students in difficulty at the end of upper secondary school, we were able to predict this situation at the end of grade 5. 85%.
Which is scary.
You know. I see the problem, I see also the risks, but we should use the data in this perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Roberto. But I would actually like to pick on a point raised by Carmen concerning the need of collecting data from different sources, from partnerships, from the need of involving different stakeholders. And I would actually raise a question directly to Andrea Saltelli. So Andrea, how do we make sure to listen to the voices of those who are measured as to methods employed, use of the data, and user right policy?
I have done some research on the critical voices surrounding the activity of INVALSI in the last few days, and they concern and they concern a number of issues, some of which have been mentioned already today. So. Reduction of education complexity to standardized text, teaching to the test, stigmatization of territorial disparities, limited impact on improving the educational system, ethical and privacy issues, data used for ranking rather than improvement, and disconnection from the school reality. Since artificial intelligence is one of the topics we will see today, I reveal that this comes straight from ChatGPT. What does not come from ChatGPT, and which I found also rich of suggestion and in part covering the issues found by ChatGPT, so this is not surprising, it comes from a blog, ROAS, the Italian blog, which is quite critical, also historically, of the activity of INVALSI, and there the critique focused on digital student portfolio, the accessibility, again teaching to the test, the Campbell or Goddard law, which you all know, the fact that the tests are not public and that external companies are contracted for grading, possibly using AI, the right to verify individual results. This is the issue of non-appellability, which is quite present in much of the literature on sociology of quantification. We might come back to that if we have time. McQuillan is one of the authors you may want to read. And the labeling of fragile students, which may be perceived as a stigma, the integration of results into the student CV, and to quote literally, an algorithmic approach based on supervised machine learning to identify students at risk of school failure. I have done some work in machine learning myself, and here comes to my mind the issue of protected attribute, how to make sure that machine learning does not reveal things we shouldn't be revealed. ROAS is also unhappy about the INVALSI plans to measurement of soft skills and experimentation with the baby tests, which are in planning. Now, my view of all this is this, the problem is not so much ethical as political. So we all know from, again, sociology or quantification from the work of Porter that numbers are purchased by organizations also to gain political power and legitimacy, which is often cases subtracted from other actors in a kind of unfortunate zero-sum game. For example, OECD PISA, for many critical voices, has become a super ministry of education at the planetary scale, subtracting agency from local or regional, from national or regional authority. What is, in this case, the role of INVALSI? The issue of ethical political comes also with important cultural connotation. We all know that the prevailing narrative is some which come from the new public management culture, which is a neoliberal inspiration, and which is in most countries, including in Italy, is embraced by both the left and the right. So creativity becomes entrepreneurship, equity becomes standardization, responsibility becomes evaluation, and improvement becomes competition. While the term dispersion, actually we could say that this is referred to class differentials in a certain sense. And I'm quoting here Rossella La Tempa, who is another of the editor of ROAS I have read in the last, in recent time, and whom I met. My own view is that the problem is with focusing on privacy. I say so because I'm familiar with the discussion which is being had on algorithms. No? When the algorithm enters into the scene, the damage is done in a sense, because as noted by scholars such as Louisa Moore, you don't teach ethics to the algorithm, they teach it to you, in the sense that once the algorithm is in the world, it acts in the world and creates a new reality where new norms of behavior apply. As I mentioned, there is a huge literature on sociology of quantification where these things are discussed, especially how caution should be used in the use of numbers, because numbers and score might anesthetize political debate and weaken democratic agency. This might surprise you, but I hope to be able to say a few more words on that. For some, the case of the Italian system, the risk is the one of an educational technocracy, where political choices are delegated to an unsupervised technical actor, also the issue of delegation. The risk is, of course, increased by artificial intelligence, now perceived by many as a threat to democracy. I was mentioning that. And here I would have a long list of names, which I don't want to quote all of them. But McQuillan I mentioned, Zuboff, Robert Saleh, there are many. So you will find this draft, if you want, on my own website. So if you are interested in the references, you will be able to find it there. What I noticed with a certain amusement is that even former techno-optimists as Harari, the Harari of Amadeus, has now become considerably worried in his last book, Nexus, which just came out this year. There is a vast topic of this idea of ruling by algorithm and by numbers. Jurists are very concerned about that. Alain Soupiot, for one, has written a lot about this kind of system, but other people like Byung-Chul Han have also worked on that. And education is a very hot topic because all of these books are strong in test case, drawn, striped from educational field. The famous weapons of mass destruction of O'Neill start with a test case of educational data going wrong. The Tyranny of Metrics of Mueller, which is another bestseller, also goes in this direction. And then okay, one could continue with the discussion on higher education ranking, where the situation is close to dramatic. Now, I want not to become philosophical, but Galileo was not always right. Okay, he was wrong on the comets, he was wrong on a crater on the moon, and we should possibly not take verbatim his suggestion that we should make measurable everything, which is not. And I say this in relation to the INVALSI suggestion, we should expand the measurement also to the attributes which are presently not measured. The book of nature is perhaps not written in the language of mathematics. And for this reason, not all that is not measured should be made to become so. Okay? And this is not me, this is a number of those sociologists I was referring before that have made a number. I am aware that this is a disappointment for academicians and number crunchers hungry for data like myself. I'm a number cruncher at birth. But a sane alternative in this case would be not to mention, not to quantify at all. And I don't want to go over. Yeah, I stop here. Yeah, okay.
5 minutes. So that gives me, thanks Andrea for the critical voice, which is good also to give some spice to the discussion. But I would pick on your comment on data going wrong, and in fact I will ask directly Aline. So indeed, there is often risks of data going wrong, and what are the risks of over-reliance on data of poor quality in shaping educational policies, and how do you think that we can mitigate these risks?
Okay, so again, I think that as a very philosophical general view, the warnings that Andrea is giving are probably warnings that we have to listen to. But I do think also that in the last 40 years, we have seen a huge progress on the educational discourse and on the use of data in education. I mean, we've been talking about teaching to the test now for at least 25 years. So I think that most educators and most data collectors are very aware of this issue. And they have tried repeatedly in different ways also to, let's say, address this kind of issue. And we have also discussed some big failures that there have been in driving educational policy on the basis uniquely of data. But this does not have to bring us to the totally opposite side, whereas all of this data is useless. I don't think it is useless, and I think again that the key to the key to having the possibility to address the complexity of this matter has a lot to do with, yes, stakeholders, yes, agency, yes, voice, and in avoiding that all of this data is perceived and used only at the academic level. I think that what has not happened in the huge efforts on data collection in education over the years at the international and national level, what has not happened is that we have not found the key to make this activity useful for teachers. And when I say that we have to focus on teachers, it is because I think, although there is a risk that one day they will be replaced by a robot, by a personalized, tailored algorithm that will teach you from your screen, some people think, in some kind of future. I do not think, I think that that would be a huge problem, and I do not think that most of the people working in the educational sector see that as a viable solution. So we need to involve the teachers, understand their difficulties, their aspirations, the reasons why they have decided to go into this profession, why in their history of their profession, what they have found that has been useful to them and what they have not found that they are lacking in terms of training, in terms even of involvement in the use of data and research. So I think that yes, we have to be aware, obviously, in general, of the fact that data is not magic, and in itself, data is nothing. The problem is how you use data, and obviously there are perils, but there are also opportunities. We are naive, though, and this is, I would like to say to Andrea in particular, in sort of consideration of what he has said, we would be naive, though, to think that it is a good idea to retract from this data when all of the private sector does use data, individual data, perfectly authorized by ourselves by saying, yes, I accept on a telephone. And they are driving huge transformations in our society, thanks to the fact that they are using it, but governments, but people in the educational sector that do this profession, especially with a lot of motivation, are not able to do the same with data that is collected or that is lying there for some reason is not made usable. The public sector has gone behind, too behind, in the modern age that we have with these challenges that information technology and that IA are imposing. And these challenges, most of us are skeptical, but they will come to personalized training if no one understands the key to how to involve the teaching profession inside the educational system with data and make them participate to the research in trying to understand something that is very difficult to observe. What makes us learn? Okay, so this has been in the session before ours, there were some suggestions on areas, again, of philosophical and psychological research. But this magic in what is learning is something that we have to help unravel better with the people that do that every day. This is to be the main key that is still missing in all of these efforts. And again, scrutiny of the usability of the data is what prevents us from falling into that trap, which is the trap of a technological-driven data structure. It is only the scrutiny that helps us avoid this. This scrutiny today is not exercised on the private sector. And the let's say, reaction to an unregulated environment on AI is leading the private sector to do a number of things that is totally vetoed to the public sector and is leading us even more behind. This is something that has to be, I think, addressed urgently. And the key, again, is learning to find the appropriate safeguards for using individual data, making individual data easier for academics and teachers to use in different ways, and working with teachers to make the data meaningful for them. And it will not necessarily be the metrics that we collect, the data that is useful for them. This is what I think we still need to discover. There have been a lot of efforts in organizing theoretically what should be measured. I think it has given a lot of insights. It has given a lot of debate also, and teaching to the test is the typical, let's say, slogan to that debate. But we know too little, and we have collectively explored too little of what kind of data is useful for the teachers. And some people may say, oh, but teachers, they don't need data because they know their classroom. Teachers don't need, but policymakers need data on teachers to understand what are those characteristics that we need to help bloom in the education system. And how can we do that? What are on the other side of those characteristics that need to be addressed by remedial action on the kind of qualifications that we can offer people who want to enter this profession? Again, this is a difficult profession. This is a profession that lots of people do with huge motivation, and maybe that's the only thing that still keeps them in the profession, okay? This is a profession that is a fragile profession today. It's a profession that is in competition with many other teaching instruments. So really, I think that there has to be a huge effort to speak, put on board, and involve the teachers in the data processes.
No, when I mention teaching to the test, again, I make a reference to some scholarship on this topic. You can look at it in two ways, no? You can put it positively or negatively. For example, normally we consider teaching to the test negatively, but if you listen to the French school of the stat activists, they talk about gaming the system as a strategy of resistance. Okay, so they look into the positive, and they make the example of New York police and Comstat and all this kind of stuff. Now, when they change their behavior to comply, and being in a sense a student of the philosopher Jerry Ravis, I always think that this story of gaming the system is extremely important whenever we discuss of developing, you know, the Goddard, an extension of the Goddard law or Campbell law, if you're an economist. Story. But when I talk about the risk, you mentioned the risk of not being used. For me, the risk is being used, or being used too much, or being used for the wrong reason. Now, you spoke a lot and in a passionate way about teachers, but now for many teachers, INVALSI has become a symbol of hostility for many of them, at least. For some of them, I have some direct feedback from some teachers. I'm not saying all teachers, but for many teachers, INVALSI is kind of, black beast. And if this is the case, and this is, I mean, it's not me. There is a scholar here called Bandini, whose paper just came out this year, who make this point. Now, why is that that INVALSI is now the symbol for a reaction, a scare reaction by the teacher? I would say then that. At least, as to Roberto, maybe the least we can say is that if INVALSI has work to do to connect more with those which are measured, which is another of the, if you read again Salé and Desrosières and those French sociologists of quantification, is exactly the main point that they make, and they famously make the point in relation to the employment indicator of flex security. But I believe here we are in a very similar point. I think that one problem, again, it will not be for all teachers, is that the teacher may perceive their own agency as challenged. And this is a very serious problem. This is indeed a very serious problem. So we can think that regimenting teachers is a necessity, okay? Because they are unruly, they don't want to follow the order, they're in a sense recalcitrant. But I believe that this kind of opinion, this kind of forma mentis, only is meaningful in the context of new public management theories, and only and specifically in this context. I will stop here.
Let's pass it to Roberto then.
No, it's not an answer. I think I do believe that it's important to discuss about these topics, but I have some questions or reflections about that. I do believe that when we manage something, there is also risks. It's normal. And of course, Galileo was not right in everything. This is not, for me, is not that a big point. I mean, Galileo is not exactly author of yesterday, and in the meantime, we did a lot of research and a lot of improvement, I guess. And from my perspective, is how we can manage these risks in order to obtain some results. Because, for instance, teaching to the test or other aspects are, of course, issues, but that I would like to see a little bit more precise, defined and measured, because it's quite the only research that I know trying to evaluate the impact of the teaching to the test is quite has a quite different perspective. But again, I do believe this is a problem, but I would like to know an alternative. I mean, if you say to me, if Carmen said to me, Roberto, you are old, the problem is that Carmen is not so polite with me, or the problem is that I'm old. This is the point for me. So, I mean, of course, Carmen is right, this is normal, but you know, the point is we have to face these problems. And for instance, teaching to the test is an issue, but not that big, because our schools are practicing the teaching to the test since decades. Nobody spoke about teaching to the test of Matura exams. I think we are, quite old enough to know that the teaching to the test was always a problem. And we should also discuss about it. But I would like to hear also the past constraints, not only the past constraints. This is for me the problem. And again, if I have a tool that helps me in order to face some problem, to face it in advance, should I give up to use these tools because there are also risks? I don't think so, I don't believe so, but again, we could discuss about it. And you quoted my friends of ROAS, that I love them. Sometimes I would like to ask them the royalties, because if they don't speak about INVALSI, there is an issue, and you know, my commercial attitude to ask them the royalties, because you know, is a way to gain money. But again, I'm joking apart, I think it's important, but to discuss it openly, and how we can reduce the risks, or which are the alternatives in order to face this kind of problems. If we have better possibilities, why not? I'm not so in love with a specific tool. I'm in love with the idea to try to solve the problems, not only to describe what is not working.
No, and again, just one additional. The risk of not using data when we are, for example, spending billions of euros on, for example, programs addressed to early school leavers, and what we do is, because we don't use the data, we give every school money, but this money is not necessarily focusing in the projects that are developed on those children or kids that we know have highest probability of being school leavers, of which we know all of 85% of them we already know when they are 10 years old. So this is a huge risk. It's not a risk, it is a damage that we do. It's more than a risk, it has already happened. So I think that we need to reflect also on this.
But I would pick up on these comments made concerning, let's say, risks on data collection, like using to the text, etc. And I would actually ask Andrea, Metten, and Carmen about how do we ensure quality and comparability of data, and especially how do we ensure that across Europe we're able to collect data that follows rigorous standards and given also the diversity of the education systems that we are living in.
Yeah, sure. So I had something written down, but I'm going to totally say something else.
Me too at the end. Don't worry.
After this. So I think, so teaching to the test is also a topic, of course, at IEA. So IEA started in the 1970s with the six topics study. And then it was researchers, so there were a few researchers coming together, just wanting to compare and wanting to learn from each other. And that's something that IEA still stands for, so we want to make sure that we get comparable data that's high of quality, that can be used. However, during the years, it's become much more a high-stake test, in sense not so much for the students' high stake, but for the policymakers' high stakes, or for the country's high stakes, or for the Ministry of Education high stakes. And that's something that we never intended for. That's also not something that's actually helpful, because these rankings in IEA and the rankings in PISA also is not something that you learn the most from. You learn by actually comparing the data and by talking to people and by having a network. And that's also the difficulty that I see here. So there is not the data. So the data, you said something like you have to make the data meaningful for teachers. But that's not, there's not the data. I think the most important thing is that you balance and that you actually can rely on data if you have qualitative data and quantitative data, and that you have the vision also as a country. So that's something that IEA always does. We never make policy recommendations for a country. What we can do is give you good data so that you actually, with your experts, with your teachers, can look at the data and make then the comparisons and make decisions that are important for you. IEA can't do that. IEA doesn't have that country knowledge. So that's why you need all different kinds of data. So in IEA, we actually have something for teachers now. We created publications for teachers, and we did that together with the National Language Center in the Netherlands. So I'm Dutch. I'm from the Netherlands, and before I actually started at IEA, I worked at the National Language Center, which was actually created after the Pearls release in 1991. So in 1991 in the Netherlands, we participated in Pearls, and we did really bad, but like really bad. Whatever ranking you used, even if you didn't rank, if you only looked at your own national data, it was awful. And what the ministry then decided was to actually create a center, this National Language Center, that stands between universities and the ministry and the teachers. So to make sure that the universities give all these perfect data and do really high quality research, but making a message for the teachers and for the policies is something that is a different skill than most of the researchers have. And so they created this institution in between that can actually make that connection. And that's the institution that we use also for our teacher publications that we have currently. You can look it up on the website. But it's still the case that the data that IEA provides doesn't give you information about a specific student, doesn't give you information about a specific classroom. So that's why you need different types of data, and all together they hopefully give you the correct picture of what's going on in your society and also in your classrooms, and to make sure that it's usable, this data. But I do want to say also, because I have a lot of teachers in my nearby, with my family, with my friends, and I was at a conference a few months ago, and they said they see somehow policymakers, but other people also see education as this panacea, so as this cure for everything. So the education world and the teachers have to be the cure for climate and education on that, and for gender issues, and for war in the world and explaining what's going on there. And in the meanwhile, it would be great if they also teach reading and mathematics and the basics. And I was scared that this panel will also be a bit of like panacea for data, you know. So data is the panacea of everything, and that's also not true. It's a tool, and you can use it, and if you use it sensibly, it actually can help. But you have to use it sensibly.
Well, I totally agree with what you've just mentioned, that for me data is necessary and we have to use it, and I think not using it, as Roberta has said, we are counterparts in Spain, so we have the same opinion. So not using it just for the risk, I think it's not a good idea. So I still prefer the risks and just dealing with them. And because everybody has mentioned the teaching to the test, I just want to mention something as well. I went to a conference once with Hanusek, and he was asked about this teaching to the test, what he thought about teaching to the test. And he said, well, I'm not against teaching to the test, it depends on what the test contains. If it's a test that contains all the right information, all the competencies that we want to develop in children. Why not? That would be a good teaching, because the test is a good test. So teaching to a test, it depends on how you look at it. But going back to your question on how to ensure quality and comparability across European countries, this is crucial. I mean, this is crucial nowadays. But we are lucky because we are not starting from scratch. There's a strong foundation on educational statistics at an international level. This is exemplified, for example, by the OECD work on education at a glance. Also Eurostat, that harmonizes data statistics from European countries. And of course the network from Eurydice, which offers data qualitative insights and also quantitative data on reforms and policies. So all these groups, they give us already reliable and robust data. And this is not just confined to the OECD and Europe. We have, for example, UNESCO working on the Strategic Development Goals, specifically on SDG 4, which not only ensures quality and equitable education, but also promotes comparability across country by developing globally standardized global indicators. And we also have groups such as Nestle, LSO, GAM that further establish common frameworks and criteria, such as, for example, the ISCEP, the International Standards on Classification of Education. So we are in a good position to have good quality across European countries. And these working groups not only help to identify gaps, which is something very important, in the availability and the quality of the data that we have, but they also encourage innovation and progress by promoting the adoption of rigorous quality standards. And one of the key achievements of these groups is bringing attention to the disparities in data accessibility, which is a risk for data comparability. So sometimes the problem is the accessibility to data. So to maintain and enhance the quality of the data, it's important that we support these groups by active participation in them. Sometimes it's difficult because it implies a lot. The European Commission just asks us for a lot of experts for different groups, but it's essential to, and also resource sharing. This is very important, as I've mentioned before, the investment in resources. But also it's important to have independent bodies to monitor and improve national data collection. We are part of the ministry, we work for the ministry, we are not an independent body. I have to say that I've never been pressured to publish anything and with different governments, but it is true that it would be real good to have some independent body that could provide the data without any kind of pressure, because in Spain it doesn't happen, but it may happen in some other countries. So independent bodies are essential for data. And something very important as well is transparency, which is not always the case. Many times we have deviation from methodologies, and it's important to communicate them, because then we can avoid misunderstandings in data interpretation. And another important thing for quality in data is patience, because to have robust and quality data, we need time, and we need to let these groups work on developing indicators that are of real quality. So to get quality data, I would say we need collaboration, we need innovation, and we need also transparency to get the best quality data in Europe.
Thank you very much. But we have been talking about the collection of data. Now there is innovative approaches to data gathering, and a lot, I mean, we spoke about today about artificial intelligence, about the role of digital. Therefore, I would like to have your feedback about what could be the role of collaboration, and especially cross-national collaboration, in enhancing the exchange of educational data across borders. Because, again, one thing is what you have at national level, but it's also crucial, especially if you look at it from the perspective, for example, of the European Commission, to have data that is comparable, that allows us to move all together towards certain objectives. So maybe I'll start with provide.
I do believe this is very important, and again, we are speaking again about harmonization and use of the data in a very standardized way in order to compare different countries. Again, we are facing more or less the same problem. I believe that we should also take into consideration the perspectives and the possibilities that we can gain from the new technologies in order to reduce the data that we need in order to have some information and to share experiences. If we understand, because we understood, I have to say, for instance, that the social background is so relevant in order to explain so many aspects of the results that we observe, maybe we could use new technologies in order to get this data. Cooperation with Eurostat or other national bodies, but again, we have to strike a balance between comparable data, otherwise it's impossible to manage or to plan policies, and this how can I say, the frameworks within we are playing should be quite open and large in order to give to each country, to each individual or entity, let's say in this way, to find a specific solution. But again, I think the comparability is a point, a crucial point of our possibility to discuss, intervene, and of course, I don't want to go too much in more philosophical reasonings, but I think this is the point, and maybe we have time and money to have this possibility to discuss because we took in the past decades and centuries some decisions with also risks. But again, I think we should define opening by discussing with the rules, but again, I think the comparability still remain a big and relevant point.
Maybe, given that we're talking about also the use of digital platforms and other instruments, maybe I would ask also Andrea Metten to give us.
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of these platforms are mentioned already, like UNESCO's Global Education Modeling, the GEM report, and there's this European School Education Gateway also that's really valuable. And IA will of course have also a lot of platforms that can be used to interpret the data, to just look around a bit in the data. So we have, for instance, our international database, our IDP, analyzer, which makes it possible for countries to share educational data with researchers and policymakers, and we spend a lot of time to explain also how to actually use this tool, because it is just very complex data. But it is, IA Hamburg has created this tool which actually makes it quite possible. Even I can use it, so it means that most people can actually use this. To create your own research questions and to see what the outcome is on a national level, or compare internationally. And of course we also have the ILSA gateway at IA, and that actually has much more data in it, not only IA data, of course it has PISA also, but also regional, like PASEC, for instance, or ERSE data in there. And if there's any questions, because in the very beginning you said something about we only measure reading or mathematics or the basics, which is not the case. We actually have the study directors here from ICCS, which is IA Studies on citizenship education. And,
Not everyone, but yes.
yeah, so exactly. So we have more data than only the basic data that's available.
Thanks. Carmen, do you have?
Well, we have that, what I can say is that digital platforms can improve data exchange by providing access to real-time statistics, which is another controversial thing that maybe we can talk about. We talk about innovation, because it can help policymakers intervene more effectively, and we have AI and big data analytics, which can process very complex data, and they can identify trends, predict outcomes, and also highlight mismatches between labor market and the skills that we have. Something very important about digital tools that can overcome some of the problems we have for international data exchange is the interoperability of digital platforms, because especially when it comes to differences in data formats, it's very important that we have standardized data formats and we adopt common protocols. So through these digital tools we can achieve this. So this is very important because we can make easier for countries to share data and also in a more efficient way.
Thanks. Well, Andrea, did you want to say something about this?
Yes, I think that one aspect which I find very worrying in this evolution toward use of artificial intelligence, and is also one of the themes of both the work of McQuillan and the now converted Harari, become techno-pessimist from a past of techno-optimist, is the idea of the bureaucrat. And this goes back to Hannah Arendt and her book Eichmann in the Lutheran, I go, which most of you have read. So the idea is that, of course, you have the bureaucrat, and the bureaucrat can be insensitive, to appeal. It can be deaf to it, like Eichmann. Okay, the story is more complicated than that. I'm just simplifying. And the point made by those thinkers, by both McQuillan and Harari, is imagine now the bureaucrat is a machine. Okay, there is a lot of literature on this point, but if the bureaucrat is a machine, no, he is the one who denies you the mortgage. It's not the employee of the bank with whom you can reckon and discuss. It's a machine. So if you interrogate the employer of the bank, he will tell you that you will not get the mortgage. And if you ask why, he will tell you, I don't know. But could we examine the software? No, you can, because it's a proprietary software. No? People like Caddy O'Neill engage, in fact, in things which are called hackathon, where they try to reverse this software to discover what is in their belly. Again, to go back to the issue of bias. But I would like to go for a second back to also to this story that the work that can happen is that we don't use the data, because you have a tremendous faith in the fact that this data contains useful information, and this is not necessarily so. Let me make an example. This is not in my notes. This is just something I'm working on now. There is this story of Alesina that migration discourage people from accepting social policies. No? So the narrative is, when a country experiences a wave of migrants, people get scared, and the first thing they think is not give money to these new people arriving. Okay? Sorry. Yeah. And this is a very plausible narrative. No? This is what Nassim Taleb would call the narrative fallacy. In fact, Nate Breslau, a guy with whom I'm working now, put together 72 different teams which went through all the evidence about that, and you know what they found? A very beautiful curve going from negative effect, a long plateau of zero effect, and a peak of positive effect. Fantastically symmetric. Okay, so, and they were totally shocked by this result. The investigators themselves were totally shocked. We, coming from mathematical modeling, were a bit less shocked. But okay, but this is another story. You say the industry is doing this, so we must do this as well as not to be left behind. No, no, and no. Absolutely no, because again, then we will fall into the trap, and we teach, we regiment our children, to be, the soldier at the service of, this industrial actor. Maybe we want to give them something. I found a question of the INVALSI to children 10 years old, where they ask what they want what they expect from life, and the question they can choose from and grade was: I want to achieve the degree I want. I will always have enough money to live. In life, I will be able to do what I desire. I will be able to buy the things I want. I will find a good job. I'm terrified by this list, okay? I'm terrified by this list. This seems to me to say that the school, instead of being an antidote, to a consumeristic society, is preparing people, is training people to dive into it, without discussing. I suspect that there is the people working on active citizenship in the room will agree with me on this point. Maybe I can stop here and continue later.
But, I mean, maybe, actually, before opening the floor to questions from the public, maybe what I sense from all the discussion here is that there is a risk, there is a perception of a risk that is difficult to strike a balance. On one side, you have a reductionist approach driven by the need of standardizing things. If we need to count, we have limits. On the other side, you have the need of, let's say, having a more holistic view of what education is and what the quality of education is. So, in a sense, there is different possible recipes of how you solve this kind of dilemma, and in a sense, there is no one correct recipe. So maybe just as a final statement from each of you, I would like to hear what you think should be. How do you think we should strike that kind of balance? So on one side, the need of having things in a framework, relatively structured. On the other side, the need of, let's say, opening up and using maybe also different dimensions, qualitative, more open, in order to inform better the schools and finally improving the quality of education. But whoever wants to pick it up.
Okay, so this is more than a $5 million question, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so I don't think, obviously, there is one answer to this. I think that there is process to this, and that this is something that has to be done and experimented. And I think that in these kinds of innovations, obviously, there is a high degree of failure before you do anything interesting or worthwhile. So having said this, however, I think that Andrea and my positions are closer than what we want them to appear in this debate. And there is no reason why, if we do continue to collect a lot of data on education, we cannot do small-scale initiatives at the local level to involve the people in the profession. This is my main point, actually. So my main point has a lot to do with agency and not so much with data. But I do think that the data which is today more useful is data that is not any longer in the realm of aggregate statistics. And this is something we have to face. And it's not because we have to follow what the private sector does, but it is because if we do not open these boxes more with the stakeholders and also using the data, someone else is going to use it anyway. This is the point. What I'm saying is that we're going to be cut out and the teachers will be cut out, but not because INVALSI exists or the AI exists or the OECD exists. It's not because these are not the reasons that are going to cut us out. Okay, so I think the real question is that institutions in this sector, and even institutions in the process of, or in the business of collecting data and making it available, have an important role to make that data, as I say, usable and useful. Now, the question of usability and usefulness is a very profound question of understanding to whom it should be useful and how to involve those individuals for which it has to be useful, and the usability, who has to use it. So this is the real question where these institutions, I think, more today than in the comparability and the harmonization of data, which obviously are very big topics on which I know that most of you are doing a huge job with a huge effort, but I do think that we're lacking behind in a collective, international level reflection on these other issues, which have become very urgent because exactly of the context that Andrea describes. Thank you.
I just want to say that in my view they are not contradictory. I think we need both. I think we need standardized tests. They give us a photo of our education systems, but that's not enough. That's not the whole film. This is only a photo. The whole film is done by using qualitative data, by using teachers' portfolios, by using everything. We can't have everything through a standardized test, but we need them as well. It's another thing that we have to see how our education system is working. I totally agree that nowadays aggregated data is just not enough, that we need to disaggregate and even go further than we do nowadays. Because, for example, in Spain, we normally do reports that we disaggregate in gender, maybe migration, types of schools, but we need to disaggregate more. We have a big problem, for example, with Roma students in Spain, and we know they are really falling behind. And we're not doing anything because we don't have any data. So if we could get those data, we could help them. We know the data can help them. So I think it's important, this aggregation. And also something important that IEA, and I'm doing just selling IEA now, is doing, is also like starting with longitudinal studies, like TIMS. Because if we can have different points in time, we can see how, we can even predict trends in future, as you've mentioned. And something that may be also a bit controversial is data we haven't talked about, is real-time data. Is data coming from other sources, not traditional sources, like the ones from internet searches. It's true that we still have concerns about robustness of these data, but the fact that there is that much data there, and their methodological methods are really advancing, these really offer an opportunity. So maybe they cannot be of immediate use, but really they have an opportunity there to include this in the future in our statistical frameworks. So I think we can't just say no to data from a standardized test. It's just another source of information for me.
My recipe, I don't have a recipe, but maybe a few things I think is relevant to this discussion on which way one should be going. Something I have studied with much interest in the work of Bourdieu, Desarosière, and these other French people is the idea that the moment of building a statistical information system should be separate from the moment of using the same information system. And this is something with Desarosière is very clear, and even more so Robert Salé, because he says if you don't do so, what will happen is that evidence-based policy will become policy-based evidence, but they don't use this because this is us. We use this because we are into science of policy. They call this a reversal of the statistical pyramid, and they call it government-driven quantification. So the fact that you decide what the policy is and then you adapt your, but it's the same concept. It's the same concept. I believe that we don't want to throw away the baby of a functioning statistical information system for education together with dirty water of political expediency. So we, as I said, we need to, probably INVALSI need to communicate better. And this is something I really feel, this is for Roberto, don't follow the footsteps of the OECD. OECD has, a few years ago I worked on the story of the OECD PISA study and all the big discussion which was held with Hanushek, Heckman, Diana Rabic and many others on whether one should stop PISA altogether. Now, it was a very serious discussion. This happened in 2014. They sent a letter to the Guardian. And if you, I cannot do it now because time will not allow, but if you look point by point, there is a paper about that to which I contributed, where if you look at this list of issues, of hot issues, in a sense they are similar to the one we are discussing today. But INVALSI is not the OECD. INVALSI is Italy. So INVALSI does not have the hegemonic intention to dominate, you know, the cultural panorama of education worldwide. So maybe Italy, you know, would better not to follow in the footsteps of the OECD. But this is my opinion. And to criticize also my party, you cannot trust researchers to do that. Researchers only want to publish paper in high impact factor, and they want this more than make the world a better place. And I talk by direct experience. Okay. Okay. So there is a key point here. No, the key point is that the political class communicate a lot about INVALSI. Okay, we have heard several ministers of education. And not everyone likes what they say. I mean, you know, I don't want to make names here because, okay, I will not do that, no? But this story of the meritocracy, there have been books about that. Sandel recently, Bourdieu many years ago, Les Héritiers, maybe some of you have read this book of Bourdieu on the so-called egalitarian French school system, and he said, guys, forget about that, your system is all but egalitarian, no? So, I mean, the narrative, the present narrative which is offered to us is that an antidote to inequality is not a fairer distribution of wealth, but more meritocracy. Of course, if you are squeezed to the bottom of the social ladder, I give you more meritocracy and you will be able to swim all the way up to the surface. I think this is totally hypocritical. This is not the way the world works, no? I think there is the politicians like very much to do fact signaling, no? Where they use numbers and use these numbers in order to appear virtuous, no? To appear to be on the right side of history and to be in control, especially in control of what's going on. Well, this is often not the case. I know that this discussion has been very, very, at least in my community in the field of epidemiology during the last pandemic, there has really been this kind of idea, fear that things haven't gone precisely well. So if I may say, and I concluded my recipe, if politicians would sell INVALSI less, INVALSI would sell better.
I give Andrea the floor to Andrea Netten before closing with Roberto.
Yeah, so of course, I agree with what Carmen said. The data that IEA produces or that PISA produces or the regional assessments give you a picture and it doesn't give you the full movie. It is something that you need in order to understand the movie, I think. So it gives you a bird's-eye view on that, and we try at IEA to make all the data as accessible and actionable as possible. And I want to actually read the summary that one of my colleagues created for me, and I thought it actually fits quite well here. So the key to use data responsibly is adapting a holistic approach to data use. We must always remember that data is a tool and not an answer in itself. It must be complemented with human insights, regularly scrutinized for quality, and used ethically to ensure that the policy it informs are equitable, effective, and aligned with the broader goals of education.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Roberto.
Thank you, and I think it's not easy to strike a balance, of course, because there are so many aspects that are contradictory, risky, and so on. from my perspective, the only way, as far as I can see, to strike a balance is to discuss the several issue points openly, without any prejudice. Maybe it's not the right word. I would say frankly, and then try to describe the situation as clearly as possible, and then it's a democracy, so the politicians should take the decisions. This is very easy for me. It means if you are a researcher, a technician, or with an institutional role, our duty is to try to do our best in order to depict the risks, advantages, and so on, and then the democracy shows very clearly the way to proceed. If we believe believe that democracy is the solution, is the best organization that we know, at least till now, they are entitled to take decisions. And to be entirely honest, I fully agree with you, of course. To do better our job is our daily goal. But from my perspective is also not to take so openly. We have a different position from a pure academic researcher. I mean, I don't believe it is proper to discuss or how can I say, not openly, because the risks that you depicted, for instance, I can see also in your positions as well. And the use of words, the use of examples, and again, you are conveying messages against or supporting different positions. So the only solution is to discuss it openly, and then try to show the good aspect, negative aspect according to our perspective, and then leave them to decide. And this is my maybe simplistic. I see also the drawbacks in my position, but I have to say, according to my very limited experience, and I beg your pardon if I'm too simplistic, but if I look to the last century, I would like to say with humbleness that maybe technology changed our lives more than our ideas. And I would like to have the space to discuss it openly, not to having the risk to be stigmatized also for my position. But if we don't take into consideration that the technology in this moment is particularly strong, and we just say no, 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 and without a convincing alternative, I don't see any point to this discussion. So for me, for my very humble and small experience, or from my understanding, the history of the last century should give us a very important message: the role of the technology. So this is my perspective. So we should have more opportunity like this in order to discuss, feeling free to express my feeling without going to the newspaper and to be labeled. Because, for instance, just the life is too serious not to joke. We are also, as INVALSI, labeled or stigmatized because we are expressing a very small reflection. We are immediately stigmatized. Do we want to discuss about this? Do we want to discuss about the possible negative impact by using this attitude to discuss about these topics? I think it would be very interesting, and I think today, this afternoon, we did exactly this job, so discussing it openly and showing our assumptions, our references, cultural references, because it is not cultural free, every decision that we will take for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. So, first of all, thanks to all the panelists for their contribution, which I believe have given many suggestions to further the discussion in many directions. I would like to open the floor to the audience for questions to any of our panelists.
It's a very simple question, especially I know INVALSI data, I don't know it's more general, is the idea to separate assessment intervention. So we have a very good quality data that can be useful for the school, generally speaking for the political government, for example, to find people with dispersion, with early level. Probably there is not something more mid-level between school and government. So I think it will be nice, more connection between assessment and intervention, because more is a experimental design, so to have a group of schools that try different strategies, because we know that there is inequality, we know inequality based on background status, based on socio-economical. Why we cannot propose, not just at a single school, but a group of schools with partnership with local autonomy, university, something to give a more experimentally based information to the politic, to try more effective strategies. Something possible, in your opinion?
Well, in my first intervention, I mentioned that to enhance quality collection, it's very important to include all stakeholders. And this is exactly the reason. It's true that we have the schools where a lot is happening, where the film takes place, teachers know exactly where the problems are, which students have are vulnerable, even before any assessment takes place, because they live with them every day. So that's where the real data comes from. And then we have politicians, and we have people like us that are technical people working for politicians. So I think it's very important to connect and also to include within, even in international assessments, this is something the OECD, I know that you don't like it, but OECD is doing, is for example involving students in decision taking, because they know what they lack, they know what's not working in schools, much better than me that haven't been in a classroom for 18 years. So I rely on many of the things that they have to tell me. So I completely agree that this is not just something bottom or top. We need to work together. Thank you.
I fully agree with you, as usual.
But maybe a comment that I can make from the side of the European, I know I'm not a panelist, but maybe a comment from the side of the European Commission. One issue that we have here is that whenever, for example, we do evaluation or assessment, we do it of policies that are already at scale. So they are already implemented in many cases, because you look at ex post, you try to assess the effectiveness of policies. However, there is an increasing number of projects that try to go in this direction of experimentation to assess smaller scale initiatives that can eventually feed into policy designs. Let's say they answer to two different issues. I mean, or better, they need to respond to two different kind of problems. The first, the assessment of policies that are already at scale is, okay, the evaluation has not been designed before the policy is implemented, so you basically need to work with whatever you have. And so are you really able to assess the effectiveness of the policy? So that's one type of question. On the other side is, all right, you assess the intervention, the small scale intervention, but do you have enough, let's say, repetitions of this kind of assessment, or are you able to draw and communicate results in a sufficiently effective way that this intervention of small scale can go at scale? So the interlocutors are different. One side is us, the other side is the member states. But I mean, it is a tension that exists. Any other questions? Barbara? Please introduce yourself.
Barbara Romano, Fondazione Agnelli. Just some reactions. I would have a lot of reactions, but the most important. First of all, I totally agree with Aline that teachers are crucial in the process, not only as a source of information, but I also think that the result of our research should go back to the teachers, which is something that is lacking. I mean, OECD reports are really important. INVALSI, I always wait the 11th of July every year in order to have the results of INVALSI. But I think that teachers are far away from OECD reports, IEA reports. We should be able to make all these data available for teachers. Transform data in knowledge and in tools for action. Because, second point, my sensation at the table is that we were only concerned about data informing policymakers. But we have teachers working every day on the field, and sometimes, of course, they know what the problems are, but they don't know so much what the solutions are. And there is a sparse knowledge, a lot of knowledge in UK and United States already available in order to say what works. And Italian teachers are not aware of all what's going on around the world. I mean, I would like to have in Italy something like what works clearinghouse or the Education Endowment Foundation, a point where some kind of center of knowledge, virtual knowledge center, where you can find the state of art for researchers and also something useful for teachers. And maybe we can build it.
And just as a comment, if you look behind on my left, you have Marco Montanari, our colleague at the DGEAC. He's actually building, mapping all research conducted in Europe in English on counterfactual approaches to effectiveness of interventions. So, in a sense, you can bother him.
We should have a conversation.
Any other question?
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you, really, for this very, very interesting debate. More than question is just a reflection and something that somehow has emerged, but that is part of my questioning as a researcher, that I think, and I would like to know your opinion, that we need to build up a kind of space, room for elaborating a common language. What I mean, we as researcher or as technician that use research for, of course, we have our language, we use the language of research because it's necessary, because it's our job. Not so, it's not the same for policymakers. They have another language, they have their own priorities. And this is the same for teachers. They have their own priorities. And my small or short experience, I think that there's a kind of black box which has never been very attentively attention. That is how not to simplify, because the question is not to simplify, and not to say things in a simple way in order that everyone can understand. But how to make together, to build together, a way to speak about complex problems, huge problems, in order that anyone can find its own way to make better its job. If it's the job of a policymaker or the job of a teacher, of a practitioner in the field of education. I think that research should work a lot on this, because it has never been studied in depth, and I think it's a key point for this kind of problem.
Listening to the last two interventions, I think that probably what is needed is a work of intermediation, of translation, which is very, very important. There is something called the concept of extended peer community. I don't know if you ever came across the terms. Originate from those who suggest an approach to science for policy, which is called post-normal science. But the concept of extended peer community is exactly the idea that we don't want to throw away, no? As I said, the baby of what we need with the dirty water, or what is expedient or not working, or biased, or whatever. For this you need an important translation work. So maybe some new kind of actor is needed, which is able to mediate between, otherwise, okay, INVALSI has an excellent line of communication with policy, may I say, I hope you don't disagree. It's probably a very good line of communication with research, but as I said, researchers are eager for more of the same because they want to publish their papers. And then all these doesn't communicate perfectly with the teachers, who, by the way, are annoyed by what politicians say about their work, which makes them, which pisses them off. So, I don't have a solution for this, but I suggest translation should really be the rule of the game here.
But with this, I would like to ask a question to Roberto, because, to me, there is an issue. Like, for example, if I think of Brexit, I'm sorry, in Brussels we all think of these things. No, but one of the lines of thinking of why Brexit happened is, okay, the minority, so the 1% who thought that Brexit makes sense, had the same visibility in terms of communication, in terms of air time on TV, than the other 98%. So, in a sense, what is the numbers? Okay, there could be many teachers who are very vocal, but are they a sizable, are they a critical mass or not? From outside, I have no perception.
Thank you very much for this question. I have some numbers, of course, it's part of the story. It's difficult to answer to your question, because when we speak about the attitude of teachers, who is able to say that, for instance? I tried to find some evidence, in my point of view, of course, it's exactly what you said, because you know, if I demonstrate against something, the point is why the other people are not demonstrating, but it was a very big discussion. But you know, especially for the primary school, because for several organizational reasons, we have every year since 2008 exactly the days of our national tests a strike of some categories of teachers, a category of group of unions in category in this meaning. And at the end of the day, the percentage of teachers taking striking teachers are around 1.2% of the teachers. More or less, this is the average percentage of teachers taking part to the strike. We could say several things, of course. Maybe the other teachers accepted a pain that they have to face, and they decide not to strike. We could do a lot of discussions, but you know, this is the only number that I have, the only information that I have. If you ask me some evidence about, and of course there is a lot of discussions on newspapers and so on, but for instance, I'm not able to answer positively to the request that I received to go to schools and discuss about the data, use the data, and so on. More or less, we are speaking about thousands of teachers asking me. So it's difficult. Maybe we could do a good research of that, because at the moment I have no evidence that this number is so huge. For instance, the only time that we had a quite large participation to the strike was in 2015, you know, and I'm not discussing about the motivation, because I'm not allowed to judge, not at all. I'm neutral to, it's not my job, but as a researcher, as I was in the past, my question is this participation to the strike related somehow with the results of schools or not? Because if the answer is no, it's a pure strike, and I fully respect it, because it's against initiative of the law. And so it's quite easy to answer to these questions. If you take the schools where the participation to the strikes, the results of the schools in the previous years, and to divide the results in two groups, meaning that schools or teachers participating, classrooms participating to the strike, the results in the previous years, and classes not participating to the strike, and I see a quite relevant differences among these groups. I mean, the classes, the teachers, the schools participating to the strike had rather significant difference in a negative sense to the previous results, in comparison with the schools that decide not to participate. And if we look to the regions of the countries, we saw a big differences among some region to the other. And of course there are explanations, several explanations. But, you know, I would like to discuss it frankly again. And as you said, it's not easy to say teachers are against, because who is able to say that? I don't think so. I don't think, I think nobody is really allowed to say that, because we don't have any evidence. And the only evidence that I know I say, of course, even one teacher is important, of course, but if I take the perspective of the system, 1.2, 1.3% is not that big number.
Thank you. So, any last question? If not, we're just on time, and I would like to thank, first of all our distinguished participants, our distinguished panelists, because I think it was a lively discussion, which is also useful in the perspective of our reflections for, the need and the dangers of data from the perspective of the European Commission. And well, we look forward to seeing all of you around and in coming events. Thank you.